3 weeks after the mill closed and took 31 years of Maurice Leblanc's life with it, his 2 sons sat down at the kitchen table in Moncton and told him they couldn't take him in. His daughter-in-law in Calgary had just had a baby. His younger son had a basement suite and a roommate and a girlfriend who was already unhappy about the roommate. Maurice understood. He said so. He thanked them for coming. He drove them to the airport the next morning in a truck that needed new brakes, and he watched their gate until the departure board changed, and then he drove home and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before he went inside. The woman next door was named Agnes Kowalczyk. She was 53. She had lived in the greenhouse on the left for 11 years, and she knew Maurice the way you know a neighbor in a maritime town. By sight, by weather, by the sound of a lawnmower at 7 in the morning. She had waved at him maybe 400 times. She had never once been inside his house. She did not know yet what was coming. He did not know yet what she was worth. Maurice Leblanc had worked at the Northside paper mill in Moncton since he was 22 years old. He started on the floor hauling pulp in a pair of rubber boots that belonged to someone else. He worked his way to machine operator, then to shift lead, then back down to machine operator when the new management came in 2019 and flattened half the supervisory structure. He did not complain. He showed up at 5:45 every morning for 3 decades. He ate the same lunch every day, a thermos of soup and 2 sandwiches in a blue cooler, because the cafeteria food was expensive and the soup was his wife's recipe, and his wife had been gone since 2016. And the soup was the one thing he had kept exactly right. He was not a man who talked about himself. His coworkers liked him the way you like a person who never causes problems and always shows up and sometimes brings in a bag of Timbits on Fridays. He knew their names, their kids' names, which ones were having trouble at home. He did not offer advice. He listened. He nodded. He remembered his wife's name had been Pauline. She died of pancreatic cancer in February of 2016. They had been married for 29 years. He was with her for every hour of the last 11 days. He held her hand when she stopped being able to hold back. He did not go back to work for 3 weeks, and when he did, nobody said the wrong thing to him because he had a face that told them where the line was. He grieved the way men in his generation were taught to grieve, quietly, functionally, in the car, with the radio off. He raised 2 sons. Felix was the older one. He left Moncton at 24 for Alberta, for the trades, for a wage that was twice what the mill paid, and a city that had no memory of his father. He had a good heart and a short attention span and a habit of calling on birthdays and going quiet for the other 11 months. His younger son was named Simon. Simon stayed in Moncton 4 years longer than Felix did, which everyone took to mean he had more loyalty. But what it really meant was that he had less money and fewer options. And by the time the offer came from Vancouver, Simon took it the way a person takes a door that opens at exactly the right time, quickly, without looking back to see what he was leaving behind. Neither of them was a bad son. They called. They meant well. They had simply built lives in different time zones, and the distance had turned concern into something theoretical. You can love your father from Calgary. You can love him from Vancouver. You can love him and still not know that he eats soup for lunch every day because your mother made it and he has never found another reason to change. The mill announced the closure on a Thursday morning in October. Maurice found out with everyone else. A manager reading from a printed page in the lunchroom while the fluorescent light above his head hummed, and 2 guys in the back kept eating their sandwiches because the news hadn't landed yet. 31 years. The plant would cease operations in 60 days. There would be severance, there would be outplacement services, there would be a phone number to call. Maurice did not call the phone number. He drove home. He sat in his truck in the driveway and looked at the house Pauline had picked out in 1994 because she liked the bay window in the living room and the maple tree in the backyard that went orange in October. The tree was orange right now. It had no idea what day it was. He went inside. He made soup. His sons came for a weekend in November. They sat in the living room with their phones on the armrests and they talked about options. Felix said Maurice could stay with them in Calgary, but no Amy, his partner, had just had the baby, and the spare room was the nursery now. Simon said the basement suite was small and his girlfriend Paige found the place already cramped. Maurice told them not to worry. He told them he had savings. He told them he would figure something out. He said it the way he always said difficult things, plainly, without drama, in a way that made it easy to believe him. Felix and Simon flew home on Sunday. Maurice drove to the airport. He watched their gate. He sat in the truck in the driveway for 20 minutes. He went inside. He made soup. The thing about severance is that it looks large until it doesn't. Maurice had enough for 14 months if he was careful. The mortgage had 6 years left on it. His truck needed brakes, and the furnace was 12 years old and the property tax was due in March. He was 53. He had a grade 12 diploma, 31 years of mill experience, and a job market that had moved on from both of those things without saying goodbye. He started applying in December. Maintenance positions. Warehouse work. He sent 42 applications over 6 weeks. He heard back from 3. He went to 2 interviews. He did not get either job. One of the interviewers was younger than Felix. The interviewer looked at Maurice's resume the way a person looks at a map of a city they have never visited, politely, without recognition. January was cold. Moncton is always cold in January, but this one was the kind of cold that finds the gaps in a house. The furnace held. Maurice wore a sweater over his sweater and kept the thermostat at 68 and watched his oil usage the way you watch something you cannot afford to replace. Agnes Kwok noticed things. That was her particular quality, the one that people who knew her well understood and the ones who did not know her well overlooked entirely. She had worked for 17 years as a social worker for the province of New Brunswick, mostly with families in economic crisis. She had left the job 4 years ago, not because she had stopped caring, but because the caseload had stopped being survivable. She worked now as a community outreach coordinator for a nonprofit in Riverview. 2 days a week from home, and 3 from a converted church building near the waterfront. She made $34,000 a year. She drove a 2014 Civic with a cracked rear bumper. She was fine. She noticed that Maurice's truck was in the driveway now at hours when it had never been before. She noticed that his lights went off earlier than usual in the evenings. She noticed that he shoveled his walk twice the day after the big January storm, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, which was not efficient, but which was what you did when you had nowhere else to be. She noticed that he had stopped putting the blue box out on Tuesdays, which meant either he wasn't generating recycling or he had forgotten, and Maurice was not a man who forgot. She did not knock on his door. She had a list of reasons not to. She barely knew him. It wasn't her place. He was a private man and she had learned to read private men. She went about her week. She drove to work. She made her own soup, a different kind, split pea, her grandmother's recipe, and she ate it at the kitchen table with the radio on. The thing that changed it was the ice. Moncton gets freezing rain the way other cities get snow. Seriously, without apology. The 3rd week of January brought 2 inches of it overnight. Maurice came outside at 7 in the morning with a steel chopper and a bag of salt and started working his front walk. Agnes watched from her kitchen window. He was going slowly. Not the normal slow of a man being careful on ice, a different slow. The slow of a man who had slept badly and eaten less than he should have and was working anyway because the alternative was going back inside. She put on her boots. She went out with her own salt bag. She did not ask. She started on the section of sidewalk between their 2 properties that technically belonged to neither of them. Maurice looked up. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he said. They salted in parallel for 20 minutes without speaking. That was the whole conversation. She went back inside. He finished his walk. She watched him from the window, and he did not know she was watching, and that was fine. The next morning, she left a container of split pea soup on his front step. No note. No knock. Just the container and a plastic spoon rubber banded to the lid. Maurice found it at 7:15 when he went out to get the paper. He stood on his front step in his housecoat and looked at it for a moment. Then he picked it up and brought it inside. He ate it for lunch. It was the best soup he had eaten since Pauline's. He returned the container the following day, washed and dried, on her front step. She left another one 3 days later. Same no note. Same rubber band. It went on like this for 2 weeks before either of them said anything about it. What broke it was a Thursday evening in late January, when Agnes was coming home from Riverview in the dark and slipped on the steps of her own front porch and grabbed the railing hard enough to save herself, but not hard enough to avoid twisting her wrist. Maurice had been watching through his front window, the way you watch when you have nothing pressing, and the street is your only television now, and he was outside before she had finished catching her breath. "You all right?" he said. "Fine," she said. "Wrist." He looked at it. He had a first aid certification from the mill, renewed every 3 years. He said, "Can you make a fist?" She could. "Barely." "It's a sprain," he said. "You should ice it." "I know," she said. "I used to be a social worker." He looked at her. "We took first aid too," she said. He almost smiled. Not quite. Close enough. He helped her up the steps. He stood in her kitchen while she got ice from the freezer, because his mother had raised him to not leave a person alone with a fresh injury until they were settled. Agnes wrapped her wrist and sat at the kitchen table, and he stood near the door the way men stand when they are not sure if they are staying. "The soup is good," he said. "I know," she said. "Pauline, my wife, she made a different kind. Habitant style, but yours is good." Agnes said, "I'm sorry about your wife." He nodded, the way he always nodded at that, once, quickly, as if accepting a delivery. "I'm sorry about the mill," she said. He looked at her. "You knew?" "Hard not to," she said. "Moncton's not that big." He stood in her kitchen a few more minutes. She asked if he wanted tea. He said yes. He sat at the kitchen table across from her, and she made tea with her good hand, and he did not offer to help, because she did not need help for tea, and he understood that. They talked for an hour. Not about the mill or the job applications or the 2 sons who lived somewhere else. About the street. About the couple 2 houses down who had bought a boat they had no idea how to use. About the maple tree in his backyard that he had been thinking about getting trimmed, but Pauline had never wanted to touch it, and he still hadn't. He went home at 9:15. He slept better than he had in weeks. Agnes noticed that too, in the way she noticed things, though she couldn't have known he slept better. She just noticed that his lights went on at a normal time the next morning. March came. Maurice had now sent 67 applications and received 5 responses. He had a second interview at a building maintenance company in Dieppe. He bought a new dress shirt for it at the Walmart on Mountain Road. He came home and sat at the kitchen table in the dress shirt and called Felix, who did not pick up, and Simon, who picked up on the 4th ring and said, "Dad, hi, sorry, can it be quick?" "We're doing dinner." Maurice said it would be quick. He told Simon about the interview. Simon said, "That's great, Dad. Let me know how it goes." He let him know 3 days later by text. He did not get the job. Simon sent back a thumbs up, and then a sad face emoji, and then, an hour later, a message that said, "Something will come through. You're tough." Messit read the message. He put the phone face down on the counter. He went and stood at the back window and looked at the maple tree. The soup came the next morning. Agnes left it without knowing about the interview. She had just made extra. The container had a sticky note this time. It said, "Extra batch. Wrist is fine." Maurice read the note 3 times. He ate the soup for lunch. He wrote back on the returned container, "Good. M." It was the most communication either of them had managed to initiate in 4 months. For 2 people who both knew how to be quiet, it was plenty. The thing about job hunting at 53 is that it is not the rejection that breaks you. It is the silence. The applications that go in and produce nothing. No automated reply, no form letter, not even the dignity of a no. Maurice sent application number 78 on a Tuesday afternoon, and by Friday he had not heard back from applications 66 through 78. He had a spreadsheet. He kept it updated. Looking at the spreadsheet was something he did the way other men drank. Not because it made things better, but because doing nothing felt worse. Agnes found out about the spreadsheet in April. She did not find out because he told her. She found out because she was walking past his kitchen window one evening and caught a glimpse of the laptop screen and recognized the color-coded format. She had used one herself years ago when she was applying for grants at the nonprofit. She knocked on his door the next Saturday morning with 2 cups of coffee and a question. "Can I see it?" she said. He let her in without asking what she meant. She sat down at the kitchen table. He turned the laptop toward her. She looked at the spreadsheet for a long time. Then she said, "Your cover letters." He pulled them up. She read one, then another. Then she set the coffee down and said, "Maurice, these read like a maintenance report." He blinked. "They're factual," she said. "They're accurate. They tell them exactly what you did. They don't tell them what you're worth." He did not say anything. "I worked in social services for 17 years, she said. "Half my job was writing funding applications for organizations that could barely explain why they existed. I know how to make a case." She paused. "Can I rewrite one?" "Just one." "You don't have to use it," he said. Okay, she rewrote 3. It took them most of the morning. He made lunch, the habitant soup, which he had finally made again for the first time since Pauline died. Agnes tasted it and did not say anything for a second and then said, "That's a serious soup." He said, "It's supposed to be." He sent the rewritten applications on Monday. He heard back from 2 of them by Thursday. He had an interview the following week at a facilities management company in Moncton. The interviewer was a woman in her 40s named Diane, who had been doing facilities work for 20 years and could tell within the first 8 minutes that Maurice knew what he was talking about. She offered him the position before the interview was over. $46,000 a year. Benefits after 3 months. Start date of May 1st. He drove home from the interview in the truck with the repaired brakes. He'd had them done in February. Found a mechanic on Elmwood who charged him a fair price, and he sat in the driveway for a moment the way he always did. But this time it was different. This time he got out of the truck after 30 seconds and walked directly across the front lawns and knocked on Agnes's door. She opened it. He said, "I got it." She said, "I know." He said, "You don't know. I just came from the interview." She said, I knew you would." She paused. "Do you want to come in?" He said yes. They ate soup. They talked until 11. He told her about Pauline, not the end, but the before, about how she had picked the house for the bay window, about how she used to make him guess what was in the soup and then refused to tell him even when he got it right, about how he still made it every week because the recipe was written on an index card in her handwriting and he was not ready to stop reading her handwriting. Agnes told him about the social work years, about the families she had tried to help and the ones who slipped through anyway, about the case that made her leave, a boy 11 years old, and a decision that was made above her head, that she had to live with for longer than she expected. She didn't give the boy's name. Maurice did not ask. They talked the way 2 people talk when they have been quiet for too long and the right person finally sat down at the right table. He started the job on May 1st. He wore the Walmart dress shirt and the good boots he had kept in the closet for important occasions since 2008. He came home at 5:30 and knocked on Agnes's door and she had made soup. Not because she had known he'd knock, but because she had made it anyway, and there was always extra. Summer came. Maurice trimmed the maple tree. He thought about Pauline before he told the arborist which branches to take, and he only took 3 and the tree kept its shape. Agnes watched from her porch and did not say anything about it. Felix called in June. He asked how things were going. Maurice told him about the job. Felix said, "That's great, Dad. I knew something would come through." There was a pause. The baby was crying in the background. Felix said he had to go. Maurice said goodbye. He looked at the phone for a moment after the call ended. Then he went next door and knocked, and Agnes said come in without him saying who it was, because by then she knew his knock. He did not tell her about the conversation with Felix. He didn't need to. She had a way of hearing the thing underneath the words, the way people do who have spent years listening to people tell partial truths because the whole truth is too much to say all at once. She just poured the tea, and he sat down, and they talked about the garden she was trying to start in her backyard, and whether tomatoes would actually work this far north in a bad summer, and whether his arborist had taken too much off the maple. In September, there was a day Maurice came home from work and found a message from the mill's benefits administrator. Something about his pension, an error in the calculation, a form he had to sign. He dealt with it, paperwork, phone calls, 2 certified letters. It took 3 weeks and 2 evenings of sitting at the kitchen table with his reading glasses on and documents spread out in piles. Agnes helped him read the pension documents. Not because he asked, but because she came over one evening to return a casserole dish and found him at the table with the reading glasses and the look of a man who had been fighting bureaucracy for too long and was starting to lose ground. She sat down. She read the documents. She said, "They undercalculated by 4 months. You're owed about $3,000. He stared at her. She said, "Write a letter, I'll help you." He wrote the letter. Agnes edited it. He sent it by certified mail on a Thursday. The mill's administrator responded 2 weeks later. They corrected the error. He received a check for $3,240 in November. He tried to give her half of it. She refused. He said, "Agnes, you earned this." She said, "I didn't. You earned it 31 years ago." "I just read the paperwork." He put the check away. He thought about it for a week. Then he did something he did not tell her about. He went to a jewelry store on Main Street. Not an expensive one, a small one that sold mostly antique pieces. And he found a brooch that reminded him of something Agnes had mentioned once, a pin her grandmother used to wear that had gone missing when her grandmother passed. He bought it for $60. He left it on her front step in a small box with a card that said, in his handwriting, "You read the paperwork. Someone should say so." Agnes found the box on a Tuesday morning. She stood on her front step and opened it and looked at the brooch for a long time. Then she went back inside. She did not come over that day. She did not knock. She knocked on Wednesday. He opened the door. She was wearing the brooch on her coat. Neither of them said anything about it. October came, and with it the maple tree going orange again. Maurice stood at his back window the first morning it turned and thought about Pauline, and he let himself do that. The way you let yourself do something you know is both good and hard, and then he went and made the habitant soup for the second time that month and brought a container of it next door. Agnes was on a call when he knocked. She pointed at the kitchen table. He set the soup down. He sat. He waited. She finished the call. She poured herself a cup of the soup and sipped it, and did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "That's a serious soup." He said, "You said that already." She said, "I meant it both times." He looked at her across the kitchen table. She looked at him. The soup was between them, and the window was behind her, and the maple tree was doing its October thing in his backyard, and it was, by any reasonable measure, a very ordinary afternoon. There is a question this story leaves on the table, and it is not a comfortable one. Maurice's 2 sons called in December. Felix called on the 15th, which was also his daughter's birthday, and Maurice was not sure which of the 2 occasions Felix had remembered to call about. Simon called on the 23rd. Both of them sounded relieved that things had turned out well. Both of them said they were glad he was doing better. Both of them said they hoped to come visit in the spring. The woman next door, the one who showed up with soup and salt and no explanation, who rewrote his cover letters and read the pension documents and wore the brooch on her coat, she did not make any promises about spring. She knew he was next door. He knew she was next door. That was the whole arrangement. So here is the question. Both sons knew their father had been struggling. They called. They offered words. They did what they could from where they were. The distance was real. The baby was real. The small apartment was real. None of it was cruelty. None of it was deliberate. And yet, when Maurice needed cover letters rewritten, it was not his sons who sat down at the kitchen table. When the pension documents came, it was not his sons who stayed until the error was found. When the ice came down in January and a man was moving slowly on his own front walk, it was not his sons who went outside with a bag of salt. Was Maurice's situation his sons' fault? Or were they simply doing what people do, living their lives at the distance that life requires? While someone else, someone with no obligation and no history and nothing to gain, decided that proximity was its own kind of answer, there is no clean verdict here. Maurice does not have one. Agnes does not have one. The maple tree in the backyard has no opinion. But here is what is true. The soup was real. The cover letters were real. The $3,240 was real. And the brooch on the coat was real. The rest is for you to decide. Leave it in the comments. I want to read what you think. Subscribe. There's more.